Hi, everyone. We're glad to meet with you again for this, our fourth session on the book of Ruth here on April 27th. You'll notice I'm in a different location. This is our Big Bear home. We decided that we could be socially isolated as well in Big Bear as in Anaheim. So we came up for the week here. So you see me in a different place and space. Hope you're all doing well with the stay home orders, and maybe some things will begin to change soon. We are in our fourth week. Last week we talked quite a bit about turning points that are seen in the story of Ruth. And before I go back, I want to say a little bit more about a question that John asked last week. He said, "Where is God in this story? There seems to be an absence of God in their dialogue." And we will talk some more about the theological implications of this book in a later session. But let me say now some of the things that I think are worth saying about it. God pervades the book, but it's very subtle. It's not like God booming out the Ten Commandments to Moses. It's a much more subtle kind of presentation. And the main theme theologically is Hesed, that grace, that giving to another when it's unexpected and perhaps very much in need, but not knowing where it's coming from. The generosity of God in Hesed. And you'll notice in the story, it seems like that there are a lot of chance occurrences of who meets up with whom and when. Yes, but I would say a little bit about that too. In this book, I think chance comes to those who are actively seeking the good. And God brings Hesed through people. And the characters meet up with the right people as they move toward making decisions, making turning points in many cases. And so God is the maker of this so-called chance. I don't believe in chance myself. I believe that the book of Ruth depicts people who are seeking the good, and seemingly a good chance comes. I think the other thing about God in this story, the legal, something went wrong with the, okay, I'll keep talking. Our screen went blank. God in the legal or cultural or tradition of the early Hebrews, the rules of life and how people understood what God wanted were in a process of formation. We may talk about that some more later. There was a tradition about certain important things that had to be taken care of, like people who are particularly women and orphans. How shall we take care of them? And they had a tradition and rules for that. But the interesting thing about the book of Ruth to me is none of the situations quite fit those rules. but there was a spirit of fulfilling the law, a spirit of doing the good that the law intended to bring about. So taking care of others was happening, but it was not so rule bound.
Okay.
She steps up to the plate. So we're going to talk about today some of the elements of the covenant that she made with Naomi. We've said that the covenant was unusual in that it was woman to woman. We have covenants man to man in other Hebrew Bible stories, but this is the primary one I'm aware of where the commitment was woman to woman. So we shall go through some of the things that Ruth said in her famous commitment, her making that commitment and promising to take care of Naomi. She says, "Wherever you go, I will go." Now, this was not the kind of society like today where people often move away from their birth families and they take jobs and they move all around the country. And the older generation of grandparents is not sitting there helping with the kids. Ruth expected that they would be wandering around in an unstable lifestyle. And that certainly differs from what most women in that time or now are looking for when they make a covenant relationship, if they get married or other covenant relationship. But this is a covenant relationship where Ruth realized their situation was one where no one was obligated to help them. So her decision was stated as, "I will go." And we're reminded of Abraham, who was told by God to leave his land. In those times, moves were very unusual. People usually stayed in the land of their parents. Often multi-generation families lived together or very nearby. But Ruth has no family, no wealth, nor was she promised greatness or progeny. She had nothing apparent to gain from her move. So she says, "I will go." In our generation, people move more or less easily. I'm thinking of my own parents who've only died in the last 5 years, and they lived their entire lives in North Carolina within 100-mile radius of the same place and never went outside that. There were brief times that when my father was in the Navy, they were in New York, but mainly they lived their entire lives within that tiny place. When I tried to bring them out to visit California, they were scared to death. They didn't want to get on a plane. They didn't like the 70-mile-an-hour speed limit that was going on then. And they only came because I bought the tickets. So Ruth is in a situation she expects to be in an unstable lifestyle. So she says, where you go, I will go. And they have switched positions because Naomi had been a stranger in Ruth's land, and now Ruth is going to become a stranger in Naomi's land. But Naomi has been away for a long, long time. So we can imagine they talked about their past lives together and their unknown future. And Ruth saw the desire that Naomi had when they moved from Bethlehem to Moab. And now Ruth saw that Naomi was empty, feeling she had nothing and had nothing to offer. So Ruth was redefining herself in her desire to go back to the house of bread, which is the term that is used for Bethlehem, even though she might not be accepted there. She says, okay, I will follow you, even when you're an empty bag. Naomi thought she was nothing and that God saw her as nothing. But Ruth still said she wanted to follow Naomi. Can you imagine a lot of conversation when Naomi tried to talk her out of coming? And Ruth probably said something the equivalent of, will you just shut up? I'm going to follow you no matter what you think. So then Naomi gives in. So then Ruth declares, wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Now that Hebrew word for lodge suggests again that they were on the move. And they were not supposed to expect a lot of change, but here Naomi is in a strange land. Jews were not supposed to overnight with Gentiles, as it would be seen as a violation of purity laws. So now they are going together, which might be another violation. Some Jewish sources say that this statement given to Naomi would have said that they were commanded never to stay with non-Jews. And there was in the Targum, which is writings about the Hebrew Bible in the century before Jesus, there were scriptures read in Hebrew, and some had to be explained in Aramaic, and it was a form of midrash where they discussed and debated what the words mean. And we are dependent on what we can gain from the sources of what were the levels of meaning or interpretation in the Hebrew at that time. So we don't know exactly, but we can infer that lodging where somebody else lodges means that you're still on the move. And there's also in the word for lodge, possibly it can refer to a man and a woman meeting. It could imply physical intimacy. Ruth is just saying she wants to follow Naomi and trust her, and every rock or whatever is in between is not going to stop me. Even though you're bitter, I'm going to follow you. So this is Ruth's stage of spiritual development, where she is more dependent on Naomi. She's leaving her land, going to a strange land. It was common that each area had its own gods. And when you moved, you took up with whatever gods were in vogue in that new territory. Well, she is agreeing to be with Ruth, and Yahweh, the God Jehovah, will be their God. So this is very important because she's giving up home, giving up her nuclear family, giving up her own culture and customs. But she is very dependent on Naomi to teach her about the ancient Israeli way of thinking about God and praying to God and trusting in God. So she also says, your people shall be my people. It's a commitment that is in present language, not that I'll be committed to you someday, or I was committed to you in the past, but that I'm committed to you right now. So some of the Jewish sources again say that Naomi may have reminded Ruth of all of the laws and rules inherent in the ancient Israelite lifestyle, but she continued to insist she wanted to follow. So she did. And she says, your God will be my God. So her commitment at that point may have been more because this was Naomi's God, not necessarily based on her own experience. She was new as a follower of the Hebrew God. And so if she moved around, she takes up the God in her new land. And probably Naomi would have explained that they don't worship the other gods, they only worship the one God. And then finally, Ruth says, where you die, I will die. If we come to bad life and we don't make it, we're going to die together. And this is rather surprising that a young woman would make that kind of commitment to an older woman. And this is a world where survival for women depended on men. And this is one woman who's chosen and committed herself to take care of another woman. So it is a very powerful model, whether you consider it to be applicable in marriage between a man and a woman, or marriage between two people of the same gender, or friends. I feel that I have friends that I have a strong level of commitment to, and that some of these concepts of commitment or covenant are definitely applicable. The law also focused on exclusion and separation from non-Israelites. So normally, Moabites could not join Israelite congregations. But Ruth, clinging to Naomi, also challenged that law. And this is a time that apparently, historically, laws of intermarriage and mixing with non-Jews were beginning to change and shift. And they show in this story that you need to find a balance between inclusion and exclusion. Ruth wanted to participate, and they accepted her and gave her benefits. They saw that she was working so hard. We will get into that in future sessions. And there's a similar concept in the New Testament where Jesus violated traditional norms, such as working on the Sabbath, in order to bring about a greater good, such as healing someone. It was not a new idea. Jesus did not think up that idea, but he did carry that concept into people's thinking, to think about the law and the spirit of the law. So that was very important in his teachings, and it continued to be important in Jewish teachings as well. So we might think about Jesus for a minute. He called his disciples his friends, and he counted among his friends many people of lower status. And it was interesting to think about how Jesus may have thought about the law of exclusion that was common in Israelite thinking and practice in that day. And we have a number of examples in the New Testament where he overrode or ignored those prohibitions or exclusions. He talked with women. He talked with women in public places that he didn't even know. So there were a lot of exceptions to not being just inclusive or exclusive, but to be inclusive with people that were outside his Israelite culture. And if you come from a Jewish tradition, you can think about examples from the prophets or from modern times who found ways to deal with exclusion. We can think of all of the holy men and women, Jewish and Christian, who rose up to fight the Nazis, who were the very definition of evil. And there was much hesed, abundant caring of people who were helpless and who would have died without help. And so this is a common motif in both Jewish and Christian practice. It's something where we are bound together to try to help those in need. And certainly in what we're going through right now, we see many examples around us of people who are trying very hard to take care of those around them. They're not worried about if they're from the same church or the same religion or from the same culture or race. They're just doing hesed. God is the source of all hesed. And in the story of Ruth, we become God's agents for hesed in the world. There were many detailed religious rules in that time. But in today's world, there are probably just as many rules. They may differ, they may be spoken or unspoken. And I'm sure that you can think about social rules and how they may differ when you're dealing with friends or neighbors or people at work who are from different cultures. And you can think about ways that you handle relationships with men or women, depending on the situation you're in. Is it different at home or at church or at work? You betcha. And it varies with the individuals. And so those rules are different in different settings. And we try to respect and honor those differences and to do hesed, to give hesed wherever we find ourselves. in these different situations where people are in need. And we can think about from the story of Ruth's commitment, what are the ideas you have of what a good friendship should be? What ethical rules would guide us? What have we learned from Ruth and Naomi about what it means to stick with someone that we make a commitment to in friendship? And of course, in marriage, we have another level of commitment that in some cases is legal, in some cases is what we call common law, which means that the rules that govern a relationship that's really a marriage, but perhaps not on paper, does follow what we call common law. And those are expected rules. If you are a couple that are not legally married, but you live together as a couple, if you separate and go to court to settle your property and your ways of handling relationships, you'll find they'll treat you pretty much like you were legally married. They recognize that. So rules shift and change with the society and the culture. In Ruth's time, there were expectations of how people would take care of one another. But as we said last week, some people fall between the cracks. And in the story of Ruth, they were taken care of anyway. Any thoughts or comments at this point? Write in your questions or comments if you have them. I'd really like to hear from you. You've been giving me some good questions to work on, and I like that very much.
Well, Martha, I have a question. This is
Okay.
John. It's not related to the text per se, but it's related to when your parents came to California at your request. You told me how they felt on their way to the West. How did they feel after their return?
I think they were very happy to get back to their farm in North Carolina. I'm not sure they enjoyed it, to be truthful.
Well,
It was more my need than theirs.
okay.
I wanted to see how I lived, and it was more for myself in many ways, and they complied when I paid all the cost.
Well, I think
they were their whole lives. They were not poor. They were not poor at all, but they were not going to spend money to get on a plane and be scared to death.
Yeah, yes, I understand. Same for my grandmother when she came to California, but
Yeah,
it was good. Anyway, I think they felt good in their heart, and knowing they were able to see where you lived and how you lived. So
I hope so. You know, I don't know how much they enjoyed it, but I think it was okay. I made it as good for them as I could. That was 1979. It was a long time ago.
oh, well, in some ways, yes. All right.
Yeah,
Well, thank you, Martha.
you're welcome, darling. We love you guys. I'm going to do a prayer, and then I have a couple other words I'd like to share.
Okay.
So I'm taking our prayer tonight.
You went away.
Psalm 63. Oh God, You are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My body longs for you in a dry and weary land where there is no water. I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and glory. Because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live, and in your name I will lift up my hands. My soul will be satisfied as with the richest of foods. With singing lips my mouth will praise you. On my bed I remember you. I think of you through the watches of the night. Because you are my help, I sing in the shadows of your wings. I will stay close to you. Your right hand upholds me. Bible pages are always so small. I mean, it's thin and hard to turn. So hear, my God, let all the righteous rejoice in the Lord. Let us take refuge in him. Let all the upright in heart praise him. We thank you, O Lord, for the life of Ruth and Naomi and their people and how they are still relevant to today, to understanding our commitments to you and to one another. Amen. I do want to say one short thing here. Some of you are not from St. Matt's. Some of you are. Some of you are from around the world. We, like many congregations, are working hard to make it through this time of stay at home when we can't meet directly with people. We're doing our best through many ways to be available to all of you out there. And we would appreciate donations if you feel moved to make those. You can go to the St. Matthew website, which is saint-matthew.org/donate, and you will come up with a button that shows you different ways you could donate to St. Matt's. Something that you may not know about us in the Ecumenical Catholic Communion and this particular form of Catholicism. Almost all of our priests and clergy work without compensation. We do not receive a salary. We are not paid. We have a bishop who is paid, but most of our workers are volunteer workers. So this study and any of the others, the masses, the prayers, the groups that St. Matthew is holding are being done out of our love for God and for you and wanting to be with you. So if you feel moved in your heart by what is happening, even if you're not a member of St. Matt's, we are inclusive. If you're a part of us, you're a part of us. We don't have those exclusionary kinds of rules. So I encourage you, if you can, donate, go to Saint-Matthew, there's a dash mark between the Saint and Matthew.org/donate, and you will be able to find the ways you could donate with us. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week for session 5. And I thank all of you for coming. And I look forward to any questions or comments that you want to write in. So good night.
Thank you, Martha.
Good night.
Good night, guys.
Good night.
Good night,
See you
Tammy.
later.
Big Bear.
Bye,
Good night.
guys.
Bye.
Love ya.
There's Yeti.
All right. Hi, Yeti.
There's
Good
my
night.
background.
Good
Bye,
night.
guys.